Thank you very much, everybody. I am really gratified to see so many people still here after 5 o'clock, a very long day of learning. So I really appreciate you staying around. Unfortunately, the wine wasn't already ready. My suggestion was going to be grab the wine and we'll sit and talk. So I'm going to try to go quick here, and instead of doing Q&A in here, we'll go out there, and I promise I'll answer as many questions as you like with the wine. With that, you have to press the on button on there. There we go. For those who don't know me, here's the obligatory "Who is this guy?" slide. I guess the slides will be available, so I won't read this all out to you. A little bit experience in various fields, implementing Lean, both into a customer organization on the logistics side, and then adapting Lean for use within the IT part of that organization in Lean Healthcare, and now running a company where we make Lean software. So whether or not I can speak well, I've got at least a reasonable claim to knowing a bit about it. Some of these, I was glad to see that a fair amount of people were not here last year. A few people who were here last year, I apologize, there's a few slides in here from last time, not too many of them though, so don't start groaning, those of you who were here. But I want to set a little bit of a context from my perspective of things. So you might know that the first slide was an evolutionary approach to agility, not to agile. Because I take very much of a mindset of agility being something that applies in any domain, agile being a very, very software-specific term that gets misinterpreted outside of there. And even within our world, a little bit of a correction of a misinterpretation, I believe, in that oftentimes when people say agile, they use that to be synonymous with Scrum. You can see the big old bubble. And then, oh, by the way, there's these other, if you're here in the UK, DSDM, and these other tiny little things. And Lean, Kanban, I'm not sure, are those the same thing or are those different things? Is it Kanban, Lean? I don't get it. I would suggest to you that that's not an appropriate way to look at the world, and suggest a little bit more something like this. There have been history lessons in some previous presentations, so I will not go through all of this history, but I put up this slide for those of you who have not seen this before to put I believe, Agile in the context that it belongs if you look at a multi-industry perspective. So if you talk about many of the things that we talk about in the world of Agile, if you stripped off the words Scrum and Agile and described what you are doing to somebody in manufacturing or somebody in logistics or somebody in healthcare, they would call what you're doing Lean. So the very same terms, we have this bubble here, Agile. Outside of IT, they call those things Lean. Now, I say this genuinely from personal experience. Like I said, I've implemented this in supply chain and logistics and healthcare, now doing a lot of work in manufacturing consulting. It's the same ideas with industry-specific nouns and verbs that go along with them, but same general idea. I don't say this as a religious thing to get into an argument with anybody, because I definitely believe, as several people talked about, that there's a great deal of value in ecumenicism between our different warring tribes within the world of IT Agile. But I say this because I would suggest to you that you will find it useful. For one, I think you will find it useful to describe what you are doing with your business customers in Lean terms, because especially if they're senior managers and they went to business school, I guarantee that they did case studies on Lean. The other way that I would suggest that it would be useful to you is that it opens the door to a lot of additional learning about your practice by looking at it through other eyes. So I don't know about you guys, learning languages, I'm sure as an American I'm woefully inadequate in that perspective. But my experience is I didn't understand English, at least the logic of English, nearly as well as I thought I did until I had to learn Spanish. Now, I'm still only enough Spanish to be a not too rude tourist, but nevertheless, I learned a whole lot about grammar of English by learning Spanish. And I would suggest to you that by going out and looking at lean literature for other industries, you will find these same ideas, and it will help you understand the why of it. It will help you learn to go beyond the cargo cult of, I'm doing this because I went to a presentation, I was told to do it, and you will understand the underlying reason for why these ideas are useful for you. So enough about that. I want to talk mostly today about Kanban very specifically, and kind of funny as a keynote, I didn't know I was going to be the final keynote, maybe I should have paid more attention to the schedule, and it's just that I was unobservant. So my presentation is kind of a basics presentation. Happily though, after sitting through the presentations today, I heard a whole lot that was awesome, don't get me wrong, but definitely was thought-provoking in advanced ways in a number of cases. And I know from the show of hands early on, there's a fair amount of new people. So I hope that for a fair amount of you, this is something you are getting into and learning. And even if not, maybe this will be useful to you as a way that you take what you already do, and this can help you spread within your organization. So I want to talk about not just sort of what is Kanban, or why it's good, or principles or practices. I want to talk about how to put Kanban in place. How, on a nuts and bolts level on the ground, can you go from we are not doing Kanban to we are doing Kanban? So that's kind of my goal today. Before I do that, I will, though, talk through the methods here. And I know that it's been talked about in other presentations, but I still think that these things are pretty important to talk about, worth repeating. So, by the way, this is not necessarily canonical order. This is John's order in the way that I have seen it be most effective in practice. So the very, 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 very first thing is visualization. I know that David Anderson will talk about that the first Kanban system actually wasn't visualization until after the fact, but I would suggest to you that in practice, getting visualization out there is crucially important, not just to get started, but for the health of your system on an ongoing basis. I'll show you more about that later. So visualization, crucially important. Feedback loops. Everything in Agile, everything in Lean, everything about Kanban is ownership of the system by the team broadly, so feedback loops are crucially important. Managing for flow, so we've heard some presentations here about flow. Chris had a great presentation about flow efficiency. I would suggest that as a training wheels aspect of flow, that one of the most crucial things for teams to learn is managing smooth flow. So I put that in as my key modifier for teams, is getting flow to be smooth. This is true in pretty much any context, but it's definitely true in ours. Policies, making policies explicit. This can be done in lots of ways, but one of the ways, and I'll talk about this more, is visualizing the current workflow is in essence visualizing your current policies. I view this later step of making process policies explicit is as you evolve your process, making that explicit as well. I definitely put limiting work in progress down the list. I agree with Pavel that A, it's very, very hard to do at first. You don't have the power to do it. And B, as you get very mature, sometimes the need to do that explicitly kind of withers away. So getting it late, it's important, but later in the process. And then improving collaboratively, and as I expressed in my earlier slide, I might say that I disagree a little bit, gently, respectfully, with some of the presentations earlier in the day, in the idea that I would suggest that a lot of the things that were described as Kanban are things that go along with Kanban and are very useful with Kanban, but are themselves not intrinsically part of Kanban. And the reason I say that is because Kanban came out of lean manufacturing. It gets used in the world of Agile. It gets used in healthcare. It gets used in construction. It gets used in lean product development and manufacturing. Kanban, the things that I'm going to talk about here, apply absolutely domain agnostically. It's pretty much irrelevant what your domain you're in, they will work. A lot of the things that we've talked about earlier today are fantastic things. I don't disagree with any of them. What I would suggest, though, is that they're very context specific. So getting into the idea of cargo cult, be careful about generalizing them, especially as you would extend the boundaries of your Kanban system beyond IT and into your customer base. So one of the reasons why I say that specifically. Okay, so visualization. This is an Excel spreadsheet which is a status report, and it's literally in Greek. Here there may be some Greek speakers. Most of the time I'm presenting this in the US, but I doubt it. I still probably doubt it, that there's neither Greeks nor like New Testament scholars in the room, nothing like that. So this is literally Greek, which is a bit of a joke, but it's, I use it as a very specific example that, it makes a point, I believe, that goes beyond just language. And that is that if you're doing projects of any size, you are inevitably bringing in experts from multiple domains. Each of those experts will have their own language for describing the work that they do. And so when you present information textually, people who are reading that text have to decode the context of that language to figure out what's being said. And most of the line items in a project status spreadsheet like this will be irrelevant to most of the members of the project team. So all of that effort in decoding is wasted. And again, I'm using examples. You can talk about that specialties within IT, but also if you're talking with your finance people, if you're talking with your HR people, if you're talking with your marketing people, the words you are using, 50% of them are nonsense to them, and vice versa. So text is a hard thing when conveying information across cultural boundaries. Pictures do a whole lot better job of accomplishing that. So as long as we can take for a given a relatively few simple patterns, which are usually true, not always true, and that is pretty much always in the West. Left is where things start, right is where they finish. In most, at least Western, driving systems, green is an indication of good, health, go, everything is okay, and red is usually an indication of stop, bad, danger, don't. If we know those, and we know that we get the simple information that lanes represent steps, it does not take a genius to know that a full lane is lots and an empty lane is not. If we can understand those basic things, then we have a communication system that allows us to speak with people. This is still in Greek. So these cards are still in Greek, and yet I, or anybody else walking up to this board, can see that there's a fair amount of red cards on this board. As a matter of fact, there's as many red cards as there are green cards. This is worrisome. So one of the things that we're trying to do in an organization, one of the ideals of management is management by exception. So managers do not want to manage the details, they want to manage the problems or the opportunities. And visualization makes it much easier for teams to self-manage the regular and let managers manage the exceptions. So visualization, hugely important. One of the reasons why I would suggest that it's hugely important, and this is a picture of a nice electronic system that I know about, but whether you're using an electronic system or whether you're using physical Kanban, I know it can be a battle. I know it can be a battle to get that permission to put things up on the wall. But visualization, not just as a status report that I look at on my computer, but something that we see all the time and cannot avoid seeing, is one of the best tools that you have in your power to make sure that the change that you start implementing actually sticks. Because the rest of the things on that list, change initiatives come and go. I guarantee it. Everything that we do, where we try to make a system improve, there's going to be ebb and flow to that. Some teams will do better than others. People will go on vacation. Members of the team will get reassigned, hired, and fired. So all the more mature things that we do in any sort of a process flow are in danger if you don't have the visualization that's up that reminds people that that process change is in process all of the time. So visualization, crucially important. Okay, so how do we get to that visualization? So a Kanban board is supposed to be a model of your process. The real process, not the process that's in a book, not the process that the manager thinks is the process, the actual process of things or how things are actually happening. And when I say process, so one of the things that often gets discussed is what's the difference between, say, a Scrum board and a Kanban board. If you buy into the theory of a high-functioning Scrum team, of a dedicated cross-functional team of high-performing generalists, then you are going to have very few handoffs, which means you don't really need a board that represents a process flow because there is no flow. There is to do, doing, done, maybe paused. If you are in an organization that actually has more specialists, that has physical boundaries, then you will naturally have more of a process flow. You will have handoffs between people. The handoffs are what you're trying to visualize. I'm not saying that it's bad to have extra lanes where I own multiple lanes, but what you're crucially trying to visualize is those handoffs, where work goes from one person or one team to another. And again, the official pattern is not necessarily what's happening. So this is an exercise that we use for teams, and I would suggest to you I think they all got taken up, but we had a Kanban roadmap booklet that was out in the lobby. Those were all taken up. I don't think I brought enough of them because they were in my luggage and I could only carry so much. You can get that online if you look on Twitter. It has some of these same exercises actually in some more detail. So step one in the process, in John's way of getting Kanban in place, is to have team members, not the manager. Manager's job at this point is to sit down and zip it at the back of the room and let the team do this. So have the team members put down, without talking to each other, what they think they are working on. A few examples of what they think they are supposed to be working on. Walk through the team members and have those team members pick up one of those items and play the role of that work and say, I am this. Before it was in my hands, I got it from so-and-so and they did what to it. And when I am done with it, I'm going to give it to who, and I think that they are going to do what with it. So you're trying to get out what is the actual process that's happening on the floor in the words of the people who are doing the work. What that will usually look like for any given person is they're describing what I'm doing to this card right now, what they did before, what's going to happen next, and as you overlap those up on the wall, you will end up with what's your process flow. As you go to finalize that, and typically what's going to happen on a Kanban board is that a Kanban board shouldn't, nothing is don't, but I would say shouldn't. What you're trying to visualize is not work, because you're not trying to track people's busyness. You're trying to track value. So what you ideally want this to represent is the flow of deliverables, the flow of units of value going through the system, which means that usually cards are nouns and lanes are verbs. The lanes do something to the card. That's what you're trying to get here. Now, as you do this, you will probably find that you end up with certain verbs, certain process steps where lots of cards go through them, certain process steps as cards are described where that doesn't happen so much. It's a one-off, it's rare. And as you look at that, my suggestion to you is that as you finalize on your board, that your board should represent sort of an 80-20 rule. So if you have lanes that are cards rarely go through, you probably don't need to have those visualized as a lane, but just a suggestion. Okay, so I've built the board here now. The next step is let's get the workload on this. Again, the manager should strongly resist the urge to talk about the official list of work. They should sit on their hands and maybe put tape over their mouth, leave the room. The point here is to get what's the work? What do people think is going on? So what you wanted to, again, have each person list their current workload by themselves, silently. This is not a discussion, avoid groupthink. Have them assign work to categories, what they think the categories of work those are. Collect those things, collate them into a single list, turn those into cards. Some information, suggested information up on the cards. Again, the focus of this being, this is a noun. We are doing the week view of the new calendar feature will be the result, not do this or do that. What's the result that we're trying to achieve? Be succinct. Limit the types of work. Color of your cards, most of the time I know that there are people who are colorblind, but 80-20 rule. Color is a very powerful communication attribute on your Kanban board. You want it to say something. So resist the urge to have card types for every tiny slice of work that you have. What you're trying to do is you're trying to create a picture that allows you to very quickly understand what's going on. And if you have lots of colors because you have lots of work types, you're not going to get that. So simplify if you possibly can. So I've got a board. I've got some card types. Some suggestions. One of the things is always have a red card as a bad thing. Often green cards as the best good thing. And then other card colors that are in essence in the middle. One of the things that we find is there's a tendency to see the process and try to improve it. And I would strongly suggest to you, don't do that. Stop at what's actually happening now and go with it. Resist the urge to improve, again, especially if you're a manager and you're helping to run this process. Let the system improve itself. Again, this is this idea of evolution. So if you look at other Agile methods, Scrum being the definitive one of those, Scrum's message, not to be unkind about it, is your old way of doing things is bad. It's broken. You should throw it out. You should start over with a new thing. Maybe that's true, but Kanban's underlying message is, I don't know. Maybe. You probably don't know either. You might have an opinion. What we need to do is we need to put in place a measuring system that allows us to establish a baseline and make our decisions about what we're going to change based on real data and a shared observation about what's really going on, not our own pet political opinions. So, visualize what you're doing right now and start feedback loops. So, daily stand-ups, nothing new. One suggestion that I would make, again, a little bit of disagreement, I don't remember which one of the presentations it was earlier in the day, but my suggestion to you is that, well, for one thing, this is not a Scrum stand-up. Don't ask everybody to talk. Because again, most of what everybody's going to say in the room, most everybody else in the room doesn't need to hear. The point is to identify problems so you can then focus on solutions. Because most of the work that's flowing in the board is flowing fine. Why do we need to talk about it? What you're trying to figure out is what are the situations. The point of this is to encourage collaboration among team members. So what we want to do is A, set some fixed period of time, short. Obviously the board needs to be complete and accurate at first. That's not going to be true. Over time, people will get used to being nagged about it. The first thing there is, are there any cards that are more important than others? We need to talk about those first. Those are the most important things. They're the most valuable things. That's what we need to talk about. Other than that, if that's not true, the next step is to walk from right to left. Done is valuable. Planning might be valuable. I don't know yet. So something that's stuck in deploy, we need to fix that problem. We need to fix it now, because by doing that, we get value to customers. Fixing something over here might just create more problems for people downstream. So walking from right to left, focusing on the problems, is going to generate high-value conversations for everybody in the room. At the end of the time, stop. Because if you filled 15 minutes with problems, and there are any more of them to the left, you don't have time to fix those problems. Focus on fixing the ones that you already got to. Stop when time runs out. So this is about value, and it's about completion. It's not status reporting. What you did yesterday, let's talk about it over beer. What I want to hear is where you're stuck. All right. So next, so that that's your daily retrospective, if you will. You want to put in place a pattern of regular retrospectives. No doubt, absolutely. Human beings need calendar events to remind us to do things that we probably should have done anyway. So that's a valuable thing. What I will say, though, is don't wait to have a retrospective if you're stuck. If work is bottlenecked, you need to stop then and have your retrospective now. Because if you don't, that bottleneck is going to keep piling up, and you are just making the problem worse, and you're going to have to untangle that later. So if you've got a bottleneck, then everybody who's to the left of the bottleneck, well, hopefully they can help you fix the problem. But if they can't help you fix the problem, I don't know, they should go fishing or something. You don't need them to be continuing to work. So if you have a blocker problem, if you have a bottleneck, stop the line. So when you hold your retrospectives, this is, I hope I'm preaching to the choir mostly, but one of the most common practices in Lean is the idea of the 5 whys. And this is the idea that we're not trying to find problems, we're trying to find the underlying problems. And usually the only way to get to those underlying problems is to keep drilling, keep drilling, keep drilling. We're not trying to solve symptoms, right? We're not trying to give you Tylenol when what you need is cancer surgery. You need to keep digging until you find the real problem. Some common problems, extremely common problems that you will find in doing Kanban retrospectives that are causing blockers. And again, there can be lots of things that you find, but some of the most important problems that you're going to find are going to be process flow problems. And they often fall into these categories. One is hidden WIP. At first, you will find almost invariably that the work on the board is not all of your work. And the reason people are stuck is because there's things that they are doing that are not there on the board. So hidden WIP is an extraordinarily common and difficult problem. One of the things that is often causing problems is people starting rather than finishing. Part of this can be management pressure to start things. Sometimes it's a self-inflicted wound. When work is hard, people like to put that work down and work on something else because maybe it's not hard. They hope beyond hope. So stopping, starting, finishing, this is one of the things that we can definitely do to remove blockers. I will tell you, I often, as a manager of a development organization, find myself having to limit WIP by taking work away from people. I literally take cards off of the board and take them to my board and say, you get it back when this other thing is done. So this is a very common pathology, not just a management pathology. One of the issues is it can be downstream or external blockages. So remember, at first, what you're asking the team to do is represent the handoff among your team members. As you go on and mature, you will often find that the problems are not internal to the team. You will recognize that what you're running into is external problems, and that's what you need to handle. There was some good conversations earlier about story sizing as a method. I completely agree. Again, my suggestion, though, is let that come out because that might or might not be useful. And one of the things that you're going to definitely see is, as you go, why is this stuck? Why is this taking so long? Well, it's because this card and this card are not the same thing. One of them's a 5-week thing, one of them's a 2-day thing, and you will see that in these conversations. One of the issues that often happens is you actually have parallel processes. So certain work is actually flowing through a bottlenecked lane pretty quickly, and other work is not. And it's because you actually have a second process hidden inside that process. And last on this list of sort of common bogeys that we see a lot in talking with customers, and this is the idea of rework. This is the fact that a process step is bottlenecked because work is often coming back upstream from a downstream step and having to go back through. So these are some of the very common things that we see coming out in Kanban retrospectives. Those can come out through 5 whys. But they also can and should be. At first, when you first put your system together, you're going to have nothing but observational data from people. You have to ask them what's going on. Over time, you will build a data set up that allows you to do data analytics on your Kanban board. That's one of the most valuable things about having a Kanban board is it turns opinion into math, which is a pretty useful thing to have. My experience is that you usually won't have that for, say, 2 to 3 months before you have a really useful, other than suggestive data set. So some of the data analysis that you can use. So a lot of retrospectives in the world of Agile that I've seen and done, I used to do this, so I'm blaming myself, was you walk into the room and you say, what do you want to talk about? What's good, what's bad, who thinks that they know something? Let data be your guide. So this is a control chart. The blue line is average cycle time during a given period of time. The red lines are your 3 sigma, which means 99% of your results fall below that top red line. Your outliers, that's where you want to have conversations. Talking about this work is going to be fruitless. I mean, it might make for a nice conversation, but again, have it over beers. These ones are the ones where you can actually dramatically affect your results, is by talking about those outliers. So the very good and the very bad is where you can genuinely affect your results. As you go along, what you should be able to do, and this is an important part of breaking your work out into good categorization, is that you can start measuring your results by category and understand that your problems are not generalized problems, they're problems specific to a particular type of work. So in this case, this is by card type, but it could just easily be by person or by customer or by whatever. What you're trying to do is look at your data to determine where it's most useful to have those 5 why questions and to dig into results. So things that take me 2 to 3 days to get done, I don't need to talk about those. Things that take me 20, 30, 40, 50 days, those are the things that I want to talk about. All right, so as we go along and we can have those conversations and retrospectives, as we have that data set, we're going to evolve our board. So over time, we want this board to become an explicit picture of what we're trying to accomplish. Some of the patterns that we see at teams, one of the things that gets talked a lot about Kanban is it's a pull method. Well, good. I should do that. Maybe that's valuable. What does that really look like in practice? What does that mean? How do I know that I'm in a pull system? Well, the simplest representation of a pull system is instead of just having a develop lane, I have a ready and an actually doing, or a doing and a done. And by seeing that, I can very easily visualize what's actually being worked on and what's already done or to be done. And that gives me a much better impression of where the bottleneck is and what conversations I need to have in the future. So if I look at develop here, if I didn't have this split into 2 lanes, I might think that I have a development problem. I might think that I have a testing problem. What's pretty clear, though, is I don't, right? So it's not that testers are backed up, it's the developers are doing too much. By splitting lanes out, I can see that kind of a problem. Swim lanes, a very common pattern on Kanban boards. This can be one of 2 big reasons for doing this. One is that I talked about this earlier, that I actually have multiple types of processes within my team that follow different patterns. And by breaking out into swim lanes, I can see the differential flow of those different types of work. The other thing that can be very useful here is for the Kanban board to grow to represent multiple teams. Because as we start understanding that my bottlenecks come from my relationships with other teams, visualizing the work of those other teams allows me to, even if it's just me visualizing what they're doing, even if they're not actually on the board, I have a much better sense of what's actually going on by doing that. And finally, one of the last things I would suggest, and I'd say that even here this is a training wheels step, is implementing WIP limits. In my experience, most teams don't have the political capital to try to implement WIP limits very quickly. The way you implement WIP limits effectively, well, first, just by having the board, you will tend to do it implicitly at first. You will start recognizing that there's too many cards, let's do a little something about it. Once you have a good data set, though, you have the information. Once you've gotten your own house in order, if you will, you have the political capital to go out and talk with other teams and get permission to experiment with something like a WIP limit, which you're usually not going to have at first. Kanban is a my impression. Kanban is a measuring system for implementing other things. So again, not that I disagree with pretty much anything I heard in other presentations today, but I think it is valuable to distinguish the measurement framework, the visualization framework, the how we understand what's happening, what's working, with what's not, with the good ideas that we might use to experiment to improve the system. Those are going to come from outside of Kanban itself, and they are going to be very specific to the context that you're using. The things that you do in a software development team versus an IT operations team versus a marketing team versus a sales team, they will have a different list of agile or lean principles. But having made that distinction, that doesn't mean they're bad. They are fantastically good things to do. My suggestion to you, though, is that there's a huge value in having a measurement system in place, having your Kanban in place before you start your experiments with these other things. Because by doing that, you will know whether those experiments are working, and you will be able to gain the information that allows you to move forward. So to loop back through these very, very quickly, visualization, crucially important. Get that in place, get it on the wall somehow. If you're using a software system, still get it on the wall. TVs are cheap. They're really, really cheap these days. There's no excuse. Feedback loops. You got to get to where the team owns the board. It needs to be their board. Smooth flow is what you're managing for. Making the policies explicit through adaptation of the board. Limiting work in progress later when you can get away with it. And not relying on your own knowledge, but looking more broadly at industry principles and practices to help your learning, hugely important. Very briefly, I hope that what I just described doesn't conflict with Scrum. Now, I tease a little bit about, I actually believe Scrum practices are extraordinarily good to put in place. The distinction that I make here is that a lot of what people will describe as Kanban is the results of Kanban. It's not Kanban itself. And Kanban itself really doesn't conflict with Scrum whatsoever. Especially if you already have Scrum in place, then the process you're going to visualize at first is going to be Scrum. And if you change it, you're changing it not because you believe Kanban is better, but because the data is telling you to make a change. So where's the conflict? Scrum is about roles, rituals, cadence. It doesn't say don't visualize. It doesn't say WIP limit. You do WIP limit in Scrum. You just do it at the outside of the box. And it certainly doesn't prohibit you from measuring flow. It just calls it velocity and uses it a very simple measure. In my experience, and I especially see this in software product development companies, very mature Scrum teams usually evolve into Scrum butts that look very Kanban-ish. And most Kanban teams that I see in IT, in software, often get into processes that look pretty Scrummy. They do stand-ups. They'll have somebody who's sort of a Scrum master. They do retrospective, so it looks very similar. The only difference here is if you were not already doing Scrum, that evolution happens because results tell you to make them happen, rather than because you believed somebody who sold you something. You're letting your own eyes tell you the truth. So to wrap it up, pretty much right on time. Yay. Some further reading, some suggestions to you, and these are in order that I would recommend the right order to read them. They're all very good books. The first of them is Gene Kim's The Phoenix Project. This is a great book for you to read. This is a great book for you to buy 10 copies and give them to senior managers in your company. It is the goal for IT. It is the book that will convince them that call it lean, call it Kanban, call it Agile, that more modern management methods are valuable and good and should be tried. It's a great convincer book. It's also a very good, easy read. Implementing Lean Software Development by the Poppendykes. This is my favorite of their books. This, again, helps you connect software and Agile to the broader Lean world. And last but not least, but I do put it last because it is somewhat more technical and very specific to Kanban, David Anderson's Kanban, a really good book with really good case studies. If you've not read it, do. Fantastic book. So with that, thank you very, very much. Let's have some wine.